took for Lysandra Voss to dismantle 5 Division I football recruits using nothing but a Happy Meal tray and physics. But the McDonald's manager already knew what was coming when he saw them corner her in the back booth, which explained why his hand was already on the phone before the first body hit the floor. Lysandra sat perfectly still as French fries scattered like confetti across the cracked linoleum, a strawberry milkshake painting abstract art on the ceiling tiles above. Caspian Sterling lay unconscious at her feet, his nose pushed back at an angle that would require reconstructive surgery. The quarterback who'd thrown 43 touchdown passes last season couldn't throw anything now except involuntary twitches as his nervous system rebooted. If you're already wondering how someone half their size could do this, you're asking the right question. Hit like and subscribe if unexpected comebacks make your day. The thanks button below helps these stories reach people who need to know they're stronger than they think. 3 weeks earlier, Lysandra had walked through Riverside Academy's Gothic archways, carrying a leather satchel that cost more than most cars in the student parking lot. Her platinum blonde hair caught the September sunlight in a way that made the cheer squad stop mid-practice to stare. At 5 feet 4 inches, she moved with the fluid grace of a ballet dancer, which was the cover story her handlers had carefully crafted. Former student at the Prague Conservatory, they'd told the admissions office. Father worked in diplomatic services, mother deceased, needed a fresh start after some vague European scandal involving leaked exam papers. Nobody needed to know that Lysandra's father had actually spent 15 years eliminating terrorist cells across Eastern Europe, or that the scandal involved 3 dead assassins who'd tried to grab her outside a Vienna coffee shop when she was 14. The exam paper story was much more believable than the truth, that she'd broken one attacker's arm in 4 places before her handler arrived to clean up the mess. The Riverside Academy Admissions Committee had been impressed by her perfect grades, her fluency in 7 languages, and the substantial donation that accompanied her application. They'd assigned her to the honors dormitory, given her a locker in the main hallway, and assumed she'd integrate seamlessly into their ecosystem of privilege and predetermined futures. What they hadn't noticed during her campus tour was how her eyes cataloged every exit, every camera blind spot, every potential weapon disguised as everyday school supplies. They missed the way she tested the lock on her assigned locker 3 times, checking for weaknesses. They didn't see her scout the library's layout with the precision of someone planning an escape route, or notice how she chose a lunch table with perfect sightlines to every entrance. The library would become her sanctuary, 3 floors of mahogany shelves and leather-bound books that smelled like old money and older secrets. She'd claimed a corner table on the 2nd floor, back to the wall, with clear views of both staircases and the emergency exit hidden behind a portrait of the school's founder. Most students assumed she chose that spot for the natural light. They didn't realize she was following protocol drilled into her since childhood. Never sit with your back exposed. Never trust a room with only one exit. Never assume you're safe just because the walls are decorated with Ivy League acceptance letters. Lysandra's first week passed without incident. She attended classes, took notes in handwriting so perfect it looked printed, and politely declined every social invitation with excuses about jet lag and settling in. The other students wrote her off as another international student struggling with American social dynamics, beautiful but boring, worth looking at, but not worth pursuing. That assessment changed when Caspian Sterling noticed her. Standing 6 feet 2 inches with the kind of bone structure that belonged on magazine covers rather than football fields, Caspian ruled Riverside Academy with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never heard the word no spoken with genuine conviction. His father, Senator William Sterling, had graduated from Riverside 30 years ago and still donated enough money annually to ensure his son's transgressions were treated as youthful enthusiasm rather than warning signs. Caspian collected things: vintage cars, limited edition watches, and beautiful girls who made the mistake of catching his attention. He had a system, refined over 4 years of practice. First came the charm offensive, designer flowers delivered to their lockers, invitations to exclusive parties, promises of social elevation. When that failed, and it rarely did, came phase 2, isolation. Suddenly, study groups were full. Lunch tables mysteriously had no empty seats, and teachers developed selective blindness to raised hands. Most girls cracked within a week, accepting a date just to make their lives bearable again. The few who held out longer faced Phase 3, which Caspian called pressure testing. That's when his crew got involved. The crew consisted of 4 carefully selected players from the football team, each chosen for specific qualities that complemented Caspian's particular brand of psychological warfare. Thaddeus Morrison, nicknamed Tank for obvious reasons, stood 6 feet 5 inches and weighed 280 pounds of muscle mass that had already secured him a full ride to Alabama. His role was simple intimidation, using his size to make people feel small, helpless, trapped. Kieran Lynch played safety on the field, an enforcer off it. Known for hits that technically stayed within the rules but somehow always resulted in injuries, he had a gift for making violence look accidental, a skill he'd perfected through 3 years of avoiding suspension despite leaving a trail of bruised ribs and twisted ankles in his wake. Dashiell Park brought connections rather than muscle. His father owned 40% of Riverside Academy's board seats and had enough blackmail material on the rest to ensure unanimous votes on any issue he cared about. Dashiell's presence meant institutional protection, the knowledge that complaints would disappear into administrative black holes. Magnus Crawford completed the group, and he was perhaps the most dangerous despite being the smallest at barely 6 feet tall. While the others used physical intimidation, Magnus specialized in psychological destruction. His juvenile records were sealed, but whispers followed him through the hallways about a middle school incident involving a teacher who'd failed him, and subsequently had a nervous breakdown after receiving dozens of untraceable messages detailing her every movement for 3 months straight. Together, they formed what other students privately called the Riverside Five, though never within earshot. They moved through campus like apex predators, taking what they wanted, destroying what bored them, protected by money, connections, and the administration's willful blindness. Lysandra appeared on their radar during her second week when she made the mistake of being beautiful while walking past their table in the dining hall. Caspian's eyes tracked her movement with the focus of a hunter spotting prey, already calculating angles of approach, methods of isolation, timelines for conquest. "New girl," Tank observed unnecessarily, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Exchange student," Dashiell added, already pulling up her information on his phone through channels that shouldn't have been accessible to students. Lysandra Voss, Prague, father's some kind of diplomat, clean academic record, no social media presence. That last detail made Magnus lean forward with interest. Everyone had social media. The absence of it suggested either extreme privacy consciousness or something worth hiding. Either possibility intrigued him. "She's mine," Caspian declared with the casual certainty of someone calling dibs on the last slice of pizza, as if Lysandra's autonomy was just a minor detail to be negotiated later. The campaign began the next morning with a bouquet of white orchids delivered to her locker, accompanied by a card written in Caspian's practiced calligraphy, inviting her to coffee at the exclusive cafe in town that didn't even have a sign, just a reputation for serving senators and celebrities. Lysandra read the card once, then dropped it in the trash without expression, leaving the expensive flowers wilting in the hallway. Caspian, watching from his usual corner, felt something he rarely experienced. Genuine surprise. Girls didn't throw away his invitations, they framed them, posted about them, used them as social currency to elevate their status. This required recalibration. Phase 1 continued for 3 days. More flowers, each arrangement more elaborate than the last. An invitation to his father's campaign fundraiser where she could network with future presidents. Box seats at the opera his mother patronized. Each offering was politely declined or simply ignored, Lysandra moving through her routine as if Caspian Sterling didn't exist. By Thursday, his crew was starting to notice. Whispers spread through the football team about Caspian losing his touch, jokes made in hushed tones about the ice princess who couldn't be melted. His reputation, carefully maintained through 4 years of calculated victories, was developing cracks. "Time for Phase 2, he announced Friday morning, his jaw tight with the kind of anger that preceded bad decisions. The isolation began subtly. Lysandra arrived at her usual library table to find it occupied by study groups that seemed to multiply whenever she approached. The computer labs were suddenly fully booked whenever she needed to print assignments. Her name mysteriously disappeared from the sign-up sheet for the advanced physics lab, forcing her to work during lunch periods when the room was empty. She adapted without complaint, eating alone in empty classrooms, studying in the gaps between occupied spaces, completing her work with the same methodical precision that had kept her alive through 3 assassination attempts and 7 country relocations. If anything, the isolation felt familiar, comfortable even. She'd been alone since her mother's death when she was 9, her father's work ensuring they never stayed anywhere long enough to form real connections. The library became her primary refuge, especially during the quiet hours between 3 and 5 p.m. when most students were at sports practice or club meetings. She'd spread her materials across the corner table, creating a fortress of textbooks and notebooks that discouraged approach while she worked through assignments that would have challenged graduate students. It was during one of these study sessions that Phase 3 began. The library was nearly empty, just Lysandra at her table and a few scattered students on the first floor. She was deep in a calculus problem when shadows fell across her work. All 5 of them stood around her table, positioning themselves to block every exit route. Or so they thought. "Studying hard?" Caspian asked with false friendliness, pulling out the chair directly across from her and sitting down uninvited. The others remained standing, Tank behind her left shoulder, Kieran at her right, Dashiell blocking the path to the main stairs, Magnus positioned near the emergency exit she'd scouted on her first day. Lysandra's hand stilled on her pencil, but she didn't look up. "The library has a no distraction policy." "We're not a distraction." Caspian leaned forward, his cologne aggressive and expensive, designed to overwhelm rather than attract. "We're an opportunity. See, you're new here, so you don't understand how things work. This school runs on relationships, connections, the right friends opening the right doors." She finally raised her eyes, meeting his gaze with the kind of steady assessment that made him unconsciously lean back. "I understand perfectly. You want something I'm not interested in providing, and you're used to getting what you want through intimidation disguised as generosity." Tank made a sound that might have been surprise or admiration, quickly covered by a cough when Caspian shot him a glare. "You think you're smart." Caspian's voice dropped to what he considered his dangerous register, the one that had made freshmen cry and transferred students reconsider their enrollment. "But smart doesn't mean much here. My father owns judges, my mother controls the school board, and I decide who succeeds and who disappears at Riverside." "Fascinating." Lysandra returned to her calculus problem. "Are you finished? This is due tomorrow." The dismissal was so complete, so casual, that for a moment nobody moved. In 4 years, no one had ever simply ignored Caspian Sterling when he was actively threatening them. They argued, they cried, they negotiated, but they never acted like he was just background noise. Magnus stepped closer, interested in this new psychological profile. "You're not scared. That's unusual. Most people understand self-preservation by now." Lysandra set down her pencil with deliberate precision and looked at each of them in turn, her gaze lingering just long enough to make them uncomfortable. "Fear requires a threat. You're 5 teenage boys who've mistaken inherited power for personal strength. That's not threatening. It's just sad." Watching her sit alone in that library, surrounded by 5 guys twice her size, ignoring every exit they'd blocked, what would you have done? Would you have tried to run? Or stood your ground? Comment below. I genuinely want to know your escape plan, because what Lysandra did next, nobody saw coming. She began packing her materials with unhurried movements, placing each book in her bag with the same care someone might use handling explosives. The boys exchanged glances, uncertain whether they'd won or lost this encounter. "You can't leave." Dashiell moved to block her path more obviously. "Caspian isn't done talking." "Actually," Lysandra stood, her bag over one shoulder, "he is." She walked directly toward Dashiell, not aggressively, just with the absolute certainty that he would move. The moment stretched, tension building as she got closer, close enough that he could smell her shampoo, something expensive and vaguely European. At the last second, his nerve broke and he stepped aside. Later, he'd tell himself it was strategic, not wanting to be the one to initiate physical contact that could be reported. Lysandra walked past him without acknowledgement, her footsteps steady on the library's hardwood floors. Behind her, Caspian's face had turned an interesting shade of red that suggested Phase 4 was about to be invented specifically for her. The weekend passed with deceptive calm. Lysandra spent Saturday at the public library downtown, far from Riverside's sphere of influence, working through assignments and maintaining her perfect academic record. Sunday found her at the gym at 5 a.m., moving through a workout routine that would have exhausted professional athletes, 2 hours of cardio, strength training, and flexibility work that kept her body ready for threats more serious than entitled teenagers. She didn't see the photos Magnus was taking from his car in the parking lot, documenting her routine with the patience of someone who understood that information was more valuable than muscle. He noted the way she checked her surroundings every 30 seconds, the defensive positioning of her water bottle and towel, the fact that she never used headphones despite being alone. These weren't the habits of a diplomat's daughter worried about exam scores. Monday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel sharper, more defined. Lysandra walked through Riverside's gates at 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes before first period. Her routine as precise as everything else about her carefully constructed cover identity. She didn't notice the anticipation crackling through the student body, the way conversations stopped when she passed, the phones already recording in case something memorable happened. The Riverside Five had spent the weekend planning something special, and word had spread through carefully orchestrated leaks that today would be entertaining. The first sign of escalation came during second period chemistry when Lysandra opened her textbook to find photos tucked between the pages. Not threatening exactly, just unsettling. Pictures of her at the public library, at the gym, walking to her dormitory, taken from distances that suggested surveillance rather than coincidence. Each photo had a single word written on the back in Caspian's distinctive handwriting. You're never really alone. Beautiful. She examined each photo with clinical detachment, noting angles, timestamps visible in some shots, the reflection in a window that revealed Magnus's distinctive watch. Then she placed them in her bag, evidence for a file that was growing thicker by the day. Lunch brought the next escalation. The cafeteria was packed, every table occupied by the complex social hierarchy that governed Riverside's ecosystem. Lysandra took her usual tray, a salad she'd make last through the period, and headed for an empty table in the corner. She'd barely sat down when Tank appeared, his massive frame blocking out the overhead lights. "This table's taken," he rumbled, despite the obvious absence of any other occupants or belongings. "Then they're very late." Lysandra began eating with mechanical precision, each bite calculated to provide maximum nutrition with minimum vulnerability. Tank reached for her tray with the casual confidence of someone who'd never had his actions challenged, intending to dump it in her lap in a recreation of countless humiliations he'd performed over the years. His hand never reached its target. Lysandra's movement was so small, so subtle, that witnesses would later disagree on what exactly happened. Her hand seemed to barely twitch, but suddenly Tank was stumbling backward, his wrist bent at an angle that sent shooting pains up his arm. He stared at her in shock, cradling his hand against his chest. "Oops," Lysandra said mildly, continuing to eat as if nothing had happened. "You should watch where you're reaching. These tables are closer together than they look." The cafeteria had gone quiet. Hundreds of eyes watching this unprecedented scene. A girl a third of Tank's size had just made him retreat without even standing up. Phones appeared like mushrooms after rain, everyone wanting to capture whatever happened next. Tank looked around for support, finding Caspian standing by the entrance with an expression that promised consequences. The quarterback made a small gesture, calling off whatever Tank had been planning to do next. This required reconsideration, recalibration, a new approach. The rest of lunch passed in tense silence, Lysandra finishing her salad while Tank retreated to nurse his mysteriously injured wrist and pride. The video clips were already spreading through group chats, tagged with variations of New Girl versus Tank and David and Goliath Riverside edition. But Caspian Sterling didn't become king of Riverside by accepting defeat. He spent the afternoon adjusting his strategy, recognizing that Lysandra Voss wasn't going to break from conventional pressure. She required something special, something that would crack her composure and reveal whatever she was hiding behind that perfect poker face. The plan crystallized during football practice while his teammates ran drills and he stood on the sidelines,